6 months ago, I believed our family budget was finally under control. Yet today, our bank balance left me feeling uneasy. We hadn't made big purchases or taken on new debt, but somehow our money was disappearing faster than before. As I reviewed 6 months of budgeting records, the numbers quietly began telling a story I had never noticed. I realized the problem wasn't simply poor discipline or careless spending, it was something more complex. My name is Clara, and today I want to share how our family has been learning to navigate the quiet changes in the cost of everyday life. Our mornings still followed the same routine, and after everyone left, I opened my finance notebook as usual. When I paid for Mira's lessons, I noticed the cost had quietly increased compared with last year. My grocery list hadn't changed, but the same money brought home a little less than before. As I unpacked the groceries, Mira innocently asked why we had less fruit, and I quietly felt the change too. That evening, Armand calmly looked at the electricity bill, while we both silently did the math in our heads. Before bed, I reviewed 6 months of expenses, searching not for someone to blame but for a reason behind the growing pressure. I realized that even though our lifestyle hadn't changed much, maintaining it now seemed to require more effort than ever before. The next morning, I reviewed 6 months of expenses, hoping to understand the story behind the numbers instead of the numbers alone. January felt balanced, with growing savings and enough room for simple family treats. By February and March, small increases in groceries, transportation, and electricity had quietly appeared. Looking at everything together, I realized it wasn't one big expense, but many small increases happening at once. My calculations showed that groceries, Mira's education, and insurance had all risen while our income stayed the same. I finally understood our savings were growing more slowly, not because we were careless, but because everyday life had become more expensive. That realization made me wonder if changing prices meant it was time to change the way we managed our money too. That afternoon, Armand and I reviewed 6 months of expenses together, searching for understanding instead of someone to blame. We agreed our spending habits hadn't changed much, which made the rising costs even more puzzling. I marked each expense with colors, and the pages slowly became a map of our family's financial journey. Most of the biggest increases came from essential needs, not unnecessary spending. I realized the problem wasn't simply my budgeting. The world around us had quietly become more expensive. Armin reminded me there was no need to panic, and his calm words helped me stop blaming myself. That night, I titled a new page 2026 Mid-Year Review, feeling that we were finally asking the right questions. The following days felt ordinary, but I began thinking more carefully about what every dollar was truly paying for. When Mira asked for ice cream, I happily said yes, knowing the memories were worth far more than the small cost. That night, I noticed several unused subscriptions that could acidly become books for Mira instead. I highlighted the expenses that truly supported our family instead of focusing only on what was expensive. I realized our priorities had remained the same even though our circumstances had quietly changed. Little by little, I understood it was our budget, not our values, that needed to adapt. At the bottom of the page, I wrote the 2026 Mid-Year Pivot, feeling a quiet sense of clarity for the first time. On Sunday, we enjoyed a simple picnic at the neighborhood park, and Mira was just as happy as ever. Watching Mira laugh with Armin reminded me that joy doesn't always come from spending more money. Mira told me she loved these quiet Sundays because we stayed together and never seemed rushed. I realized the time we shared meant more to her than many of the things we could buy. Looking at Armand, I knew we both understood that our presence was one of the greatest gifts we could give. I reflected on our past 6 months and realized rising costs mattered less than protecting what truly mattered to our family. When we got home, I added one final note to the 2026 Mid-Year Pivot. If one part of the budget must grow, another must shrink so our family can continue living with peace. That night, I sat with my budget notebook, wanting to understand our family more honestly than our finances. I divided a page into 2 lists, the costs we couldn't control and the choices that were still ours to make. Seeing the second list reminded me we still had more control than I had realized. I understood I had spent too much time focusing on rising prices instead of the decisions we could still change. I highlighted the priorities we wanted to protect: Mira's education, our savings, health insurance, and healthy meals. I marked subscriptions, impulse purchases, and unnecessary takeout as expenses that could wait without regret. For the first time that year, I stopped feeling defeated by the numbers and focused instead on keeping our family moving in the right direction. The following evening, I asked Armand to review our notes after Mira had fallen asleep. I realized we weren't failing with money. We were using an old plan for a life that had quietly changed. I showed him the 2026 mid-year pivot and explained that we should protect our priorities while adjusting less important expenses. We laughed when we found an old subscription neither of us had noticed for months. Armand reminded me that carrying financial worries alone had made everything feel heavier. Together, we reorganized our budget calmly, knowing we still had our home, our work, and each other. Although the numbers stayed the same, I finally felt like our family had taken back control of our direction. A few days later, we slowly began following our new plan, making small changes that felt realistic for our family. I canceled a few unused subscriptions and soon realized we didn't miss them at all. We started cooking at home more often, and those simple family dinners felt warmer than ever. I kept saving a little each month, finding more peace and consistency than in chasing bigger numbers. When I reviewed our finances again, the numbers weren't perfect, but I knew exactly how we could adjust if needed. I realized financial security comes not only from money, but from a family's ability to adapt and communicate honestly. One afternoon, Mira drew our family smiling in front of our home, and I knew those shared dinners had become one of our greatest investments. The first 6 months of 2026 taught me something I never found in any financial book. Prices may change and inflation may arrive unexpectedly, but being honest about our situation still gives us room to make better decisions together. I no longer try to create a budget that looks perfect on paper. I prefer one that can live alongside change, conversation, and the reality of family life. I have come to believe that transparency is not about comparing our numbers with anyone else. It is simply the courage to acknowledge where we are and look for answers without blaming one another. If today's story feels familiar, I would be happy to keep growing together through Clara's Family Journal. We continue learning that healthy financial choices can also bring a quieter and more peaceful feeling into family life. Before we part today, I find myself wondering which expense has surprised other families most during this middle part of 2026, perhaps by sharing our experiences. We can remind one another that facing change does not always need to happen alone.